Welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we discuss the most interesting topics in the world of Indiana basketball. This is our 188th edition of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 643rd episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, September 24th, 2020. I am your host, the coach, Brian Tonsoni. And let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call, how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment.
And Indiana is the national champion.
When it comes down, Indiana will be champion.
Smart takes the shot.
The Hoosiers have won the national championship.
This week's banner moment occurred on Wednesday when Andy Katz, a rather well-respected basketball analyst, published his Power 36 basketball rankings. Indiana was ranked number 18 in his preseason rankings, and while we are getting closer to the season with each passing day, and many websites and reporters will be sharing their preseason thoughts, the reason this is a banner moment is that Indiana basketball is one step closer to being back where it regularly belongs, and that is in the national discussion. If the Hoosiers end up, quote, 18th, they will be a top 5 seed in the NCAA tournament. And while that is not ultimately where we want the Hoosiers on a regular basis, it is a beginning. The ranking does come with some caveats. IU is the seventh ranked team in the Big Ten, according to Katz, and are behind Rutgers. For things to really be back to normal, Rutgers should never be ahead of our Hoosiers. Also, preseason rankings and potential are simply what might be, and obviously no guarantee of on-court success. We know far well, injuries, bad shooting, ball screen defense all still remain possible issues for the Hoosiers, but for now, in these most recent times and with the COVID-19 business, it is sure nice to be thought of as a top 20 basketball program. Pressure is on the coaches and the team to make sure that the end-of-season rankings display a similar ranking. Okay, now let me introduce my esteemed co-host for this week's show. First off, to my left, we have the Renaissance man of Indiana sports. He is one of the OGs of Indiana sports podcasting. He's the author of the new book, Social Media and Sports, and he is an esteemed member of Indiana's Name, Image, and Likeness Task Force. Oh, and he smokes meat like a pro. He is Galen Clavio. Galen, what's been your number one takeaway in this strange offseason of sports?
Thanks for the ever more embarrassing introductions. We're getting to the point now where it's just like, wow, what are they going to say next?
The whole first segment is going to be Galen's accomplishments.
It's just essentially, it's like when they roll the scroll out and it goes for a mile down the entryway to the castle. Yeah, my biggest takeaway is that I think I underrated how much I enjoy sports. The amount of non-sports time that we had in spring and early summer. I think I'd gotten jaded. I think I'd gotten myself to a point where I wasn't fully enjoying sports. I've been watching, the NBA, conference finals. I've been watching NHL. I've been watching soccer. I've been watching college football with a vigor that I have not had in previous years. So it's been an unfortunate palate cleanser, but maybe a necessary palate cleanser to be back and watching sports again. And it's great to be talking to you guys as well.
Well, we're glad to have you, and the intros can never be too long for such an accomplished person. And to my right, we have a man who hasn't written any textbooks yet, but who has written thousands of viral posts for the Big Lead, and he maintains his open invitation for Archie Miller to hire him as Indiana's shot doctor. He is Ryan Phillips.
Analyzing players, finding every wrinkle. He hasn't ever hosted, never lifted a finger. He's got all the
Well, let me quickly add just one thing about this.
Dude just interrupted his own jingle.
Ryan, let's hear your rant on the last week in IU sports or sports in general.
Well, I think one of the biggest developments we saw today is that now all 5 of the Big 5 conferences will be playing sports again, as the Pac-12 has voted to play football, and they'll be playing, I think, 7 games each, and then have a title game in December. So
is the Pac-12 still considered a major league?
No, it shouldn't be, but technically it's one of the Big 5. I agree. It's well, hey. The good thing is the rumors are Larry Scott will no longer be the commissioner soon, so maybe he can retake even like a mild spot. And but I think that with the development of a lot of rapid testing and things like that, it bodes well for the return of college basketball. Was what I was getting to, is the fact that they're willing to play football out west, where there are more restrictions than there have been other places because of, let's face it, the Pac-12. You look at a lot of the major institutions in the Pac-12 are in major cities, and they're not college towns. And that's why they were so slow to get back, is there were outbreaks in the major cities. And that's where we've seen most of the problems. And so the fact that they're willing to take that leap, and, right now, a couple of the schools are still having issues of figuring it out, but at least they voted to move forward and figure it out as they go. And also to part of the deal was they're going to bring back their other sports as well. Basketball will be back, and some winter sports will be starting on time. And so, again, we've seen positive progress here. Now, is it smart? We'll find out. But at least it seems that the momentum is going to containment and figuring this out. And with rapid testing and getting more testing of athletes, you're starting to see the potential that, okay, maybe even if it's a more bubbled scenario, even if there aren't fans, even if there are, it's a little different. At least we're going to get the sports, it looks like. And we may, it may not look normal, may not look how we want it to, but at least it appears we're going to get some sports across the board, not just in pockets across the country, but it looks like it's going to be everybody. And so I just a positive development today. Now the key is figuring out how to execute it properly and make sure that, we keep everybody safe and stick with the protocols and all that stuff, but just a positive development for sports today.
Okay, here's what we're going to talk about this week. We'll give you some Hoosier headlines. The main segment, we're going to talk about some Ken Pom offense and defensive rankings needed traditionally to make a deep run in the NCAA tournament and see where IU compares. And we'll end with some listener questions. All of this coming up this week on Assembly Call Radio. But before we get to all of that, a quick announcement. Please continue your support for our friends at Homefield. Their Big News Saturday has been a tremendous push for their business. And, yes, buy all your IU gear first and then go if you have some other schools or you collect college gear, their designs and their logos and the comfort of their T-shirt. I have about 7 shirts and sweatshirts in the cart just waiting for me to hit submit. But I'm going to wait till all the shirts come out and maybe try to get a loan. But homefieldapparel.com/assembly20 to get some help from us to buy your Homefield apparel. But please continue to support them. Okay, Hoosier headlines. We're going to start with a sad note. Condolences to Damon Bailey's family. Damon's parents were in a motorcycle accident this week. Damon's father, Wendell, passed away. His mother, the last that we have heard, is in the hospital in serious condition. Please, Hoosier Nation, keep Damon Bailey and his family in your thoughts and prayers as we wish them nothing but the best here from Assembly Call. As mentioned in the banner moment, Andy Katz came out with IU ranked number 18 in the rankings, but 7th in the Big Ten. Romeo Langford season came to an end with more wrist injury issues, and he had to have season-ending surgery on his wrist as the Boston Celtics face a deficit in the Eastern Conference Finals. Galen, anything on either in those headlines or something else jump out for you about Indiana this week?
No, I mean, the Damon Bailey family news is just horrific. And it's what can you say? I mean, it's such an icon of not just Hoosier basketball, but this basketball in the state of Indiana. It's one of those things that you just kind of inconceivable. It happens. And, it's being on the road is dangerous regardless of what you're driving and where you are. And it's just a shame that this has happened. So yeah, my condolences go out to his family and the best of feelings and hopes for his mom that she's able to pull through here.
Yeah, I as a young kid in Southern California, I even followed the saga of Bailey as a when he was a kid coming up through the high school system in Indiana, and just an absolute legend. And I actually got the chance to interview Damon a few times when I would cover games at Bedford when he was coaching there, and always a really nice guy and seemed to be just welcoming and totally great with the media at least. So yeah, of course that's terrible news, and our thoughts are with his family, of course. And a great Hoosier. I mean, even if I had never met him, it's somebody in the Hoosier family is hurting, and I'm sure we all feel for them.
Yes, again, all thoughts and prayers from us here at the Assembly Call. out to Damon Bailey and his family. Interested to get your thoughts real quick on Andy Katz ranking. I know it's preseason, and those are a dime a dozen, but I do like Andy Katz's work. I think he does decent work, fair work. And it's just nice to see that Wednesday and hear the podcast of his that Indiana's 18, and his comments were that he really is high on the Hoosiers. Galen, your thoughts about where I'm loving that 18 to 25 range, and maybe just outside of it, depending on who's ranking.
Yeah, I think that's fair. When you think about where IU was at the end of last season in Ken Palm, I think they were 34. And in a lot of predictives, they were in that range where they were going to be in the tournament. They were kind of on the fringe of at large, but they were still there. And you figure with the continuity, with the players they've got coming back, and with what you've already seen the defensive improvement year over year, and the idea that the offense would improve in kind, you would think that this would be a team that would be in that protected seed range, like maybe right on the cusp of that. Certainly, I think there are teams in the Big Ten that you can point to that have, more returning talent, 1 through 9 or 1 through 10, whether that's Michigan State with what they've got, or in Illinois with who they've got coming back now. And some of that's almost accidental. It's like Indiana, I think, was going to be higher in the pecking order in the Big Ten because there was going to be more attrition, and that attrition didn't happen because of the COVID-19 situation.
There's no chance for anybody to bust out with a big tournament and make the jump either. That was kind of a problem.
Yeah. So look, it was an arrested end to the last season, but you had to, I think certainly I could see people making an argument that perhaps maybe you don't have to assume that they were going to make this next leap up, but it seems like the natural trajectory that Indiana's on right now. And so, yeah, I think 18th is pretty fair. And I think that was where I would kind of hope they would be. I would have been shocked if they were significantly higher, but I would have been surprised if they were lower than that.
Ryan, your thoughts on what Andy Katz put out for the Hoosiers?
Well, I think one thing that's interesting about it is you look at how deep the Big Ten is expected to be. And I think that, it feels like that's every year now. The conference has really stepped up as what I think is the best conference in college basketball. And you see just the depth and breadth of it to have 7 teams, 8 teams, or, 8 teams in his top 32, I think it was, with Purdue at 32. But you see the other teams. I think you got Iowa at 5, Wisconsin at 6, Michigan State at 12, and Rutgers at 13. I mean, these aren't necessarily, with Iowa and Rutgers and Wisconsin, these aren't teams you look at as being a potential top 15 team, but the conference has just gotten better, and it's consistently gotten better. Now, I don't think all those teams are going to live up to those expectations, and who knows if Indiana will. I mean, we have yet to see this Indiana team perform like a top 20 team consistently. So it's but it's also interesting to know that what we've been saying all offseason, like Galen said, is that there's been a slow progression for this program of getting slightly better every year. Now, hasn't taken the big leap that we've all wanted, but it feels like there's a momentum behind just improving and improving and improving and improving, that finally in year 4, maybe that's the year they'd make that little, going to 18 wouldn't be this huge leap, but it's a jump, and it's moving up to the next level. The issue is going to be, it's going to be interesting is how this season looks. And if they're primarily only playing Big Ten teams and the Big Ten's really good, the record may not be what we want it to be percentage wise, but we might still see that progress. And look, there's eye test progress here too. I mean, last year, the team's defense was obviously better, and the offense at times looked like, oh, okay, we get what they're trying to do now, where that hadn't been the case in the past. It felt like somebody had to go make a play for something to work. So again, the eye test told you they were getting slightly better. The results in the Ken Palm rankings and all of that stuff felt slightly better. I think this might be the year that we finally see them actually show that they're better all the way around.
The 18th ranking really caught my attention, and then the 7th in the Big Ten also caught my attention because it's going to be a brutal season again, and the teams that are 8th, 9th, and 10th aren't pushovers either in the Big Ten. And some conferences you have 3 or 4 really outstanding teams, and then the bottom half is really poor, and the top can get a lot of wins and look better on a national stage because their record's better, but they're not playing week in and week out tough opponents in tough road venues normally with crowds, and maybe even tough on the road without crowds. So 18th is great. It's a 5 seed, but it's 7th in the Big Ten behind Rutgers. It is a little bit of a pause, but again, if you're playing in a good conference, that speaks volumes. You know, if you're competing and winning, if you get 12 or 13 wins in the Big Ten this year, I think that's a good accomplishment. But we do have to be aware of that and not be too upset if we're not 16-4, 15-5 type jump. I think.
Well, think about last year. I mean, there were a number of Big Ten teams you would have said they could make a run in the tournament. You know, I mean, because they'd been through the wars every night in the conference. I mean, the tournament was going to be easy for some of those teams comparatively. So you're definitely going to get that again this year where there might be a 6 seed out of the Big Ten where it's like, well, you know, they hung with Michigan State. They hung with Iowa. They could take someone, you know, bigger. I really think the Big Ten and maybe the ACC are the two conferences that prepare you for the tournament better than anybody because there's no off nights. I mean, no completely off nights. Even, you know, a Northwestern can jump up one night and beat you. We saw Penn State was pretty good last year. You know, I mean, there's landmines all throughout the conference.
And so it's going to be interesting for the Hoosiers. Hopefully they are hovering around that top 10, top 20 ranking all season long. We'll talk more about that in our second segment. But one thing that you do need is some basketball players and some recruiting news. Hopkins is cutting down his list. I'm not sure that's going to be we might make the final list, but I think that's a little bit more of a long run. And then Aminu Mohammed seems to be really interested in Indiana, and it seems like a decision will be coming in December or early January. He's more of a slasher than a shooter. But if you have shooters and have a post, a downhill guy isn't bad, and he's ranked 14th. And so you get good players in, then all of a sudden those rankings get to be a little more steady, and you don't drop in and out of the rankings. But, okay, coming up on the assembly call, we're going to look at some Ken Pom offensive efficiency and defensive efficiency numbers that usually make long runs in the tournament and see if IU stacks up. All that and more next on the assembly call. Stick with us. All right, 17:22 for the first segment. Hello, everyone in the chat mob. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Coach, in this break, I'm going to drop out, restart, and come right back in.
Okay.
Be right back.
Very good, very good. Ryan looks like Lion O or a smart hobbit. Okay.
No, there's no need to talk down like that about hobbits. I mean, really.
True.
There's so much hair on this podcast when Jared is here.
Yep.
And then
you Jared and Ryan. I got to step out of that conversation.
I think it's a natural counterbalance. It's good. You know?
Yeah.
It's
Trust me, I look better this way than when I had the little splotchy stuff. I got a face for radio.
Oh, man.
Oh, man.
So it's interesting. I mean, Katz says Indiana projected 18th. Torvik's got Indiana 24th, which is better than I thought it would be. And 11-9 with in conference projected record. But then again, I mean, I'm not sure what he's projecting the rest of the record off of, or I guess it's just because there's no actual record or schedule to project off of at this point. So that's an interesting, just kind of abstract shot that he's taking there.
Yep. And that's interesting. I think his rankings get better. Well, so do Ken Pom's, but they get better as the season goes on. When, who did he had really high last year? I forget who he had really high last year.
It's interesting this year. His top 5 are West Virginia, Texas, Virginia, Gonzaga, and Baylor. If that's actually the top 5, wow, it's definitely a COVID season.
It'll be interesting, Galen, come bracketology stuff. They're talking about not using the net, which takes away all those, those 19-11 or 20-11 teams that have had 4 Tier 1 wins that are hanging on those Tier 1 wins. If it's more eye test, that's going to make our job tougher. But it's going to be interesting to see what teams have to do to make it in.
Did you see that Ken Pom blog post where he just essentially fragged the idea that the committee would use the eye test primarily? Like that was,
I did not.
it's worth reading because he goes in pretty hard, not just on the idea that the eye test is a good idea, but even like that, because like the eye test for like hiring coaches is pretty flawed as well. So I would recommend checking it out.
Very good, very good. All right, gentlemen, on this segment, the whole idea of Rob Doster on Iowa is that they're not poised to make a deep run because their defense is so bad. They're like projected supposedly in the 70s, and most teams that make a run to the Final Four are top 40 defensive teams and top 30 offensive teams. And Iowa was far away from that. Last year they were 97th. So his long dive was more on Iowa, but I thought that we could take a look at, Indiana's gone from 65 in Archie's first year defensively down to 26. So the defensive numbers the last 2 years, 32 and 26, could make a run defensively. Offensively, as we all know, it's been bad, 92, 82, 65, but it's gotten better. So the main question probably will be, how big a jump can we expect? I looked at Ohio State had a big variance in Holtman's 3 years. His first year they had top 20 offenses and defenses, and then they went to the 80s and the 60s, and then they went back up again.
Well, his first year, that was Keita Bates-Diop. His first year was Bates-Diop just being amazing, right? I mean, that was essentially.
What does it take to make that big jump? Does Indiana have the talent to jump 62 to 30 offensively, probably to make a run to the Sweet 16, Elite 8, or further? Obviously, I'm not sure this is a Final Four team. I'm pretty sure it's not a Final Four team. I'd like to see them make the tournament and win a couple. But
do you think the jump last year was a lot of just Trace being more efficient with the ball when he got it? I mean,
offensively,
yeah. I mean,
yeah, they were really the same though with Romeo. I mean, they were 32nd with Romeo.
Oh, that's true.
I
forgot that. Yeah,
offensively,
we'll see.
So they were real close offensively last year. Defensively they were. Last year, offensively, they jumped 17 points,
17 spots,
while losing 2 NBA players. So again, the whole concept of this second segment is just: do they have enough to make a 30-slot jump into that ballpark of, your top caliber teams?
Okay.
All right,
let's do it.
Here we go.
Hey guys, it's Gene Steratore, CBS officiating analyst and retired Big Ten basketball official. I have never listened to the assembly call, and to be honest, I don't intend to. But if you listen, make sure you ignore anything Ryan says about officiating. He's really good from the seat of his pants, but I wouldn't trust him on the court with a whistle around his neck. Time has proven him wrong on virtually everything. Take care. We'll talk soon.
Welcome back to the Assembly Call. You can find all of our content at our website, assemblycall.com. And if you ever want to join the chat mob live during our unedited live broadcast or watch these replays and see all the in-between segment banner, then check out our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/assemblycall. I'm the coach, Brian Tonsoni, here with Ryan Phillips and special guest Galen Clavio, author of Social Media in Sports. And so in segment 2, we're going to talk about what it's going to take offensively and defensively from a Ken Pom offensive efficiency and defensive efficiency rating to move Indiana into discussion of a deep run in the NCAA tournament. This week, Rob Doster, formerly of NBC Sports, now doing some freelance writing, wrote an article on the Iowa Hawkeyes and how he didn't think they, even though being ranked in the top 5 in some rankings, top 10, and one of the favorites in the Big Ten, are really poised to make a deep run in the Big Ten because their defensive efficiency has been so poor in the past and is only predicted to be a top 70 team this season. His basic consensus was that it takes a top 30 defensive efficient team to make a trip to the Final Four, a top 30 offense and a top 40 defense to be able to try to make that run to the Final Four. And he listed a lot of information about teams that didn't meet that criteria, and he averaged out teams. For example, a Final Four average team is 20th in offense and 20th in defensive efficiency. The champions are average 10 going into the tournament offensively and 15th ranked defensively. So that gives you some idea of the quality of offense and defense that is needed in order to make that run. There were 15 teams that didn't meet one of those criteria that made it to the Final Four. South Carolina, for example, in 2017 was 149th in offensive efficiency, but yet made the Final Four. But they were third in the nation defensively. So there are 15 outliers. Indiana last season was 26th in defensive efficiency, which would meet Rob's perception of a long run in the NCAA tournament. So defensively, it seems like if IU can continue and even improve, they're there defensively. Offensively, they rank 65th in offensive efficiency, and they are well a ways away from what it takes to make a long run. And the question here in segment 2, we'll start out with you, Ryan, is does this team have the capability to make a big jump and move from 65 up to the top 30 offensively, which is needed to make a Final Four or an Elite Eight type run this season?
You know, I'm high on the pieces on this team. I think they fit Archie's system really well, finally. I don't know if they can make a 30-spot jump. I really don't. I think that that's going to take some elite shooting, which I don't think this team has. I think their shooting will get better, but I don't think they're going to have guys who can just stand outside and knock down three-pointers and really spread the floor for a guy like Trace Jackson Davis to eat in the post. I think they can improve, and I think they will improve. And I think they have, and you look at it, they have improved yearly under Archie Miller, both offensively and defensively. You've seen gradual improvement, and we just talked about that. But I think that to make a 30-spot jump into the top 40 and into the top 35 might be out of reach for this team. But I think that if you look down the line and say like, okay, well, they'll make a 10-spot jump or 15-spot jump this year, and then another 10, 15-spot jump offensively, you start to see, okay, then you're starting to get into the Final Four talk. But I don't think this team has what it takes to make a huge leap offensively. Now, look, when you get in the tournament, I know he has his presets of what it takes to win, and I believe in that stuff. I think that it really is effective. But there are the outliers, and I think that this team could make a run if it defends as well as it's capable of defending and makes the improvement defensively that we've seen. And jumping from 26 to 15 changes the calculus of whether or not you can actually make a run in the tournament if you catch the right matchups and all that. We've talked about endlessly on the show. You got to get lucky to make a run in the NCAA tournament. The matchups have to be right, all of that stuff. You have to not be traveling too far. There's all kinds of things that happen. But I think that offensively, if you're talking strictly by the numbers, I don't think this team will make that large jump. I do think it'll move up, though.
It's always interesting, too, because some of that's in your control. Are you improving offensively or defensively? But some of it's also the teams that finished ahead of you last year, do they regress? So, when you have team rankings from year to year, each team is different, which will allow either a regression backwards or improvement. What you do look for in my idea is a program moving forward. I am happy with IU's offense going from 92 to 82 to 65 and defense from 65, 32 to 26. That's been 3 years of statistics moving in the right direction. Galen, your thought on does this roster provide a chance to really jump up in its offensive efficiency this year enough to where they really have a chance to maybe get to that Sweet 16 and maybe get a game or two further?
Well, no, I don't think it. Let's put it this way. I don't think that there's enough there to make a huge 30 or 40 spot leap on offense for some of the reasons that Ryan said, but also I just don't think they have a scorer that is athletic enough to be all over the court doing what they need to do. Like, you don't necessarily have to have, the shooting's great. Shooting's really helpful. But if you're not going to have that, you at least need to have that really kind of elite athlete that's able to score from anywhere 18 feet in. They don't really have that either. And that's nothing against Trace Jackson Davis, because I do think that one of the things I look for with offense is year-to-year improvement by individual players. And it's not just that the team has gotten better, but a couple of things have happened, I think, over the last couple of years that are worth noting. You have individual players that have gotten better at offense. Al Durham made a 7-point offensive rating increase from his sophomore year to his junior year. Justin Smith had about a 13-point offensive rating increase from his, from last year or 2 years ago to last year. Now he's obviously gone, and that's not great, but I think what you see is that individual players can and will get better within Archie's system. And so the idea is, okay, Trace Jackson Davis scored at essentially a 1.2 points per possessions used clip last year. Can he up that to 1.25 or 1.3? It's a lot, but it's around where some of the really good big men for IU have been in the last 10 years or so when they've really scored well. Can you get the same sort of improvement out of Joey Brunk, who was at about a point per possession used? You're losing Devontae Green, who, I hate to say it, but Devontae just wasn't a reliably good and efficient offensive player. He never, I don't think in his last 2 or 3 years exceeded 1 point per possession used. And then he would create problems on the defensive end as well. So a lot of it is in that exchange. And so when I look at this roster, I think the guys that have the best chance at a real jump forward are Jerome Hunter. Can he go from that 90, that 0.9 points per possession mark and really jump that up into the ones? And then can Race Thompson take that 112 offensive rating that he had and convert it into more offensive possessions used? If you get those two things, you get Trace Jackson Davis maybe increasing a little bit, you get Rob Finney off the schneid, and then you get Christian Lander coming in and doing good things. Suddenly that is an offense that has the potential to be in that 20 to 30 range. And then I think you're cooking.
So, yeah, and and just to piggyback on what Galen was saying, you also in that case have an offense by committee instead of everything has to be Trace Jackson Davis and then someone else has to step up, and who it's going to be is a mystery every game. And that was a problem they ran into last year, was where are they going to get those second offensive points? Sometimes it was Devontae Green, sometimes it was 10 here, 10 here, 10 here, but you didn't know consistently where it was going to come from. And if you have an offense by committee, a guy like Jerome Hunter can have an off night. But Race Thompson, Christian Lander, Rob Finney, Al Durham are going to pick him up. You can have a game where somebody goes for 30 off the bench or, off the outside of Trace Jackson Davis to complement him where everyone else struggles. If you have that balanced consistency where you're getting points from other guys don't have so much pressure to come through all the time for you to produce wins. And I think that you're right in that there is a potential for a lot of guys to make improvements. And we have seen that in this system. It's just a matter of, do they do it? And so I think you're right. I think we have seen some guys make consistent jumps. It's a question of whether or not this group can do it. And I think they can. I think you're certainly capable.
And one thing real quick is, I think a lot of this team's offensive efficiency is going to be a direct result of their defensive efficiency and their defensive play. And the fact that they made the jump they did into essentially a top 25 defense nationally last year, if they can make a consistent leap beyond that, which I think is entirely possible given Archie Miller's focus on defense, given the athleticism this team has got now you've got a situation where you're not relying as much on the shooting to try to, to compensate for that lack of defensive possession transitioning into offensive possession.
So I'm going to go right back to offense because I thought, Galen, you brought up a really good point about individuals getting better. How much does scheme play a role in that? And I'll throw that to you, Galen, first, and then to Ryan. They talked about an increased pace. They've talked about Christian being more in the ball screen and his efficiency coming off of the ball screen. And it sounds like a little more up-tempo even in the half-court. How much does that help those individual numbers, or is it just players getting better or better players coming into the program? What makes a program, whether it's IU or anyone else in your opinion, make that jump from 65 to 29 or 30 offensive efficiency? Scheme or just individual improvement?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both, but it very much depends on the coach and the system that they're trying to play. I mean, part of the issue, it's funny, as much as they talked about trying to increase pace, the pace was essentially the same compared to the rest of college basketball last year as it was 2 years ago. I think for IU and for Archie Miller, for whatever reason, this is not an offense that's going to necessarily thrive because of the players being nobody's really rising above and beyond what the scope of the offense can do. It really is very much a system-based offense right now. And a lot of that is because of the lack of outside shooting. You don't have those exclamation points that carry you from possession to possession. And so IU has to rely on execution, and they have to rely on efficiency the old-fashioned way through hitting shots, hitting 2-point shots, hitting free throws. That did get marginally better. And I think in this case, what you've got this year is you have some talented players, and it's a matter of within the system and within the confines of what they're doing for each other, what Ryan just said, making it so that you've got 3 or 4 contributors. I mean, if you go back and read Season on the Brink, one of the big differences between the 86 team and the 87 team was that it wasn't just Steve Alford having a good night or a bad night that equated to IU having a good offensive night. Because now you've got Daryl Thomas that can score. Now you've got Dean Garrett that can score. Now you got Ricky Callaway that can score. And I think it's the same thing here, where it's like Trace Jackson Davis combined with hopefully a Rob Finney that can both shoot and pass, combined with a Jerome Hunter, combined with anybody else that's one guy.
Yeah, I think one thing with this team, and I think why they went so hard after Christian Lander, aside from the fact that he was a 5-star point guard in Indiana, you got to go after that guy, of course.
Besides that,
but aside from that, it's and he's got a Chris Paul like first step. I mean, why would you go after that guy? But no, I think that part of it is the pace, and he plays at a higher pace. And Archie is always preaching pace and wanting to play faster. And you're right, last year they didn't. And I think part of that is it's not in Rob Finney's nature to play fast. And you've seen Archie a lot of times exhorting him to get the ball up fast, to get cheap points in transition. Lander's a guy who will do that. And especially, I don't know, again, he's 17. I don't know how much he's going to play this year as far as like being a starter and playing 25 minutes. But he's a guy, when he's on the floor, is going to push the pace and is going to look for Trace Jackson Davis running the floor, Race Thompson running the floor, finding guys in the corner off the break who will have open shots. If you move fast, you get better looks. Now, bogged down in a half-court offense, you're right, Coach. The scheme, how much does it make them better? We'll find out being Romeo or Jawan, Morgan, or just Trace Jackson Davis. And if Devontae Green can do something for you, they're expecting contributions from multiple people. And so we'll see what the scheme can actually do when multiple guys are threats. Yeah. And if they can hit shots, that opens things up, of course, as well.
I do think that as much as this is a team-based offense and to some degree kind of a system-based offense, there's a couple of individual players that are going to be huge that aren't necessarily the stars. Like obviously Trace Jackson Davis is going to have to be a slightly better version, but Al Durham to me is probably the linchpin for the entire offensive show this year for IU, because that is a guy when he is on is able to score at an efficient pace. He's able to shoot from outside. I mean, he shot 38% from 3 last season very quietly, I think. And it kind of snuck up on people at the end of the year. That ended up being Indiana's best outside shooter. If he gets more volume of shots and is able to hit at that clip or better and continue to cut down on turnovers, continue to be more efficient, it really transforms what Indiana is able to do on the perimeter, and that ends up helping their interior. And so it's really everything has to work. And I think that's been, to some degree, the criticism people have had of Archie Miller's offenses at IU so far, is that when one thing breaks down, everything breaks down. If they can get away from that, and if they can have a situation where they've got enough pieces where even if one thing breaks down, the rest of it works, I think we're doing better at that point.
Well, and on your point about Durham, what was great about him is he was hitting shots, but he was also getting to the rim and getting fouled and making his free throws. And so he was able to do both. And again, with Al Durham, and I know Jared has talked at length, and Andy too, about how he might be the most important offensive player next year and the one indispensable guy other than Trace Jackson Davis. He was also playing with incredible confidence at the end of last year. He wanted to take the big shots. Against Illinois, you saw that. And in different instances, he wanted to be the guy to come off a screen, catch a 3 and shoot it and rise up, and playing with that kind of confidence. If he comes out this year and he is that confident, you're right. He is that guy that's indispensable, and everybody else can play off of that. And you're right about the inside out and things not working. Inside out is a symbiotic relationship. It's both have to be working together, because if you just play inside and you just play in the paint, guess what? That's easy to defend, and you can run doubles. And if you don't have adequate play from the perimeter, you're in the interior just gets bogged down. And at the same token, if you don't have an inside presence, they can overplay the 3-point line and basically wait for you to drive and punish you for that. So both things have to be working for the offense to work. I agree.
So I gather from both of you that we're headed in the correct direction. It's not quite there yet to jump from 65 up to 30. It could happen. I agree with you, Galen, about what people are going to get sick and tired of hearing me say closer. You need that closer that can pull up and hit a jump shot from three, can drive, pull up at the elbow, can get to the rim and get fouled. We had one in Romeo, but we didn't have the other pieces around him. You can't just have a closer. You need a closer within the scope of everything that you guys have said. I also think scheme matters, and whether it's been personnel-driven or coach-driven, the fact that we've only had an inside game emphasis and offensive rebounding last year, and we had some other things, I think it's got to be a multifaceted offense in order to improve those numbers. So quick, on offense, if we've made the jump from 92, 82 to 65, a quick guess at where Indiana ends up. I know there's a lot of things that go into that, but where do you think Indiana ends up with their offensive efficiency this season?
Well, I mean, Bart Torvik, whose site I highly recommend, love it, use it the same as Ken Palm, has Indiana projected right now at 32 offensively, which sign me up for that. Now that's again, we don't know what the schedule is or anything along those lines, but I think that range is reasonable. I think a 35 to 40, if everything works, and certainly it's a best case scenario. But I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, I'd say 40, 45. Again, I'm being conservative though, because we have to see some of these guys who haven't really had full career. I mean, Jerome Hunter hasn't played a full season with a full off season. You know what I mean? I have very high hopes for what he can be, but we just haven't seen it yet. But I have projected him to be very good. Race Thompson, if he stays healthy, I think Race Thompson is a huge piece of this team. I've been saying it for a year and a half now. I love what that guy does when he's actually on the floor. I think if those guys can be efficient offensively and can be, rise to the level of their talent, we could make it even higher jump than that. But I'd say in the 40-45 range is what I expect, and would be pleasantly surprised to go higher for sure.
We get in the 30s and 40s. I think we're going to have a lot of good post-game shows. I just think we've been missing
nice
offense
change of pace,
lately.
right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not one of those when we sign in, we're all like, oh, here we go again. But I do think the pieces are there to get better. It's just going to be how much. And then the opponents matter too, because like we said, the schedule, the brutal Big Ten schedule, you could be better. And defensively, we haven't talked defensively. You've gone from 65 to 32 to 26, which is a defense that is capable of making a long run. But inside those numbers, and every stat has an inside, they were 8th or 9th in the Big Ten, and their numbers got worse in the Big Ten against better competition. So they're going to have to be a top 5 defensive team as well in the Big Ten. And if that does happen, then you're going to see a top 20 defensive team. You combine that with your 30s, 35, 40s. And again, I think it'll be a season that we appreciate. Your guys' thoughts on defense improvements other than, not hedging the ball screen and staying with them till you get to the, half court type thing that we had last year.
I mean, greater athleticism and greater depth in athleticism. I think big things. If you got a Jordan Geronimo that can come in and give you, 5-10 good defensive minutes without necessarily asking for a lot on the offensive end. If you've got Race Thompson healthy all year or Jerome Hunter able to move, I think that it's easier to track offensive improvement efficiency-wise than it is to track defensive efficiency, period. I think I read something the other day where Brad Stevens is like, if I see stats with individual defensive efficiency numbers, I just stop reading, because it's almost impossible to trace even at the highest levels. But I think IU as a group, when you watch what they do, they are getting better every year because the recognition of where they need to be and how they need to be playing with each other against the opponent continues to get better. So I expect that to continue. And I think they keep loading the bench with people that can play that way. And that's important.
Yeah, I think that you made a great point, is guys like Trey Galloway can come in and give you some minutes, and Jordan Geronimo, just be athletic defensively. But also you're getting guys who've been in the pack line for a certain amount of years. They're going to be better at it, just from playing in it for a while. And, when you first get certain guys, they have habits that might not align with the pack line, and you have to sort of get them out of that and get them. I think the defense can take another jump this year. I just think, again, having more reliable, smart players who are a fit for the system will just continually make it better. So I think the defense is going to make another jump this year for sure.
it's hard to hide a bad defensive player. You know, you can take a bad offensive player and make him Sloan screen 45 or whatever that was back in my day, and just make him screen and go offensive rebound. But it's hard to hide a defensive player that's bad. And if you have multiple players that are offense first, defense second, instituting a defensive game plan can be very, very difficult. And you've seen where it's taken some years to get guys used to the pack line and get better. I do think that Indiana consistently can be a top 25 defensive team, and that bodes well for the trajectory of this program. I'm an old Indiana Bobby Knight guy, defense first, because defense is something you can control with your heart and your mind and play every night. Offense is more skill-based. I mean, a guy like me that doesn't have much talent can go guard somebody. I can't throw it in the ocean sometimes, but you know, you need those guys that can probably do both. And the comment where you keep stacking guys on the bench so you don't have a drop off, or if you need a shooter but he can't guard, are you coming out on top in the long run? And I think this roster is better both defensively and offensively. The question for me is just how much versus a quality Big Ten schedule. And if you only play 7 non-conference games and 5 or 6 of them are against real top conference opponents, you're going to have to be on point right away. Any last thoughts on offense or defensive efficiencies, gentlemen?
I just expect an improvement. I just expect an improvement across the board. How great that improvement will be is I don't know, and we'll see. You know, it's also been a weird offseason. How much have these guys been able to train? How much have they been able to play together? All that stuff, we don't know. And so it's harder to factor that like a natural progression in. But I would say that we've seen the growth every year, and there's no reason to expect that to stop, especially because I think the roster's better this year than it was last year. And technically, I think it was better than it was the year before, even though you had 2 NBA players. I think the surrounding pieces weren't as good. I think this is a much more solid roster top to bottom.
It feels like everybody can contribute. And I think the improvement across the board, even if it's just marginal, is going to even out some of the dips that this team had at various points in some of the games. And that was really what lost them some of the games last year. That was the difference between finishing 9-11 and 12-8 in conference. And that's all you need. Is you need a 3 or 4 or 5 game improvement in and out of conference, and you're good to go. And so I think that they're a lot closer to that than they were before they started the offseason.
Well, let's hope for that improvement and for a decent run. Let's get to the NCAA tournament and then win a game or two, and we'll reevaluate what we just talked about. But coming up in our third segment, we'll answer more questions. We'll ask Galen about his role in the Name, Image, and Likeness Committee and some other questions. So stick with us here on the Assembly Call. All right, 42-33.
That is wholesome
So
content right there.
We have some 7 minutes here.
I'm going to order food real quick, and I'm going to mute myself because that is not interesting for the listeners. So
I'm fascinated by the menu.
Well, I wonder what you're going to have. They
We're
deliver
doing pizza.
cereal?
We're doing pizza. They don't
okay.
deliver cereal. We got plenty of cereal. We're just sick of it.
All right.
Hold on one second.
So anyway, you want me to frame this question or just throw it to you and talk about something?
I've had these questions every other way that you could think of. So yeah, it's fine.
I assume it's a good process and things are looking up in that area. That's awesome.
It's really interesting, although it's an easily misunderstood area. So, you know, that's it's part of the reason why I'm happy to talk about it, because it's a lot of people I think don't quite. I mean, because it gets so tied up in all of this garbage about how people view college athletes and what they can and can't do. So I'm happy to talk about it. Yeah.
Yep, and go as long as you need. If you hear Ryan say it's time to go, then just kind of circle out of your topic and we'll end the show. Earlier, we have a couple more questions.
Yeah, once Ryan finishes ordering tacos or whatever he's getting here, I'm sure we can go back and forth on it a little bit. So.
Look at his face studying the options on the pizza. He's concentrating. He doesn't want to mess that up.
I heard that.
That was some serious ordering going on right there.
Yeah, it was deep concentration.
So what do we order?
We got a medium pizza with mushrooms, black olives, and sausage, and a large with pepperoni. We're gonna have it lunch for the next week.
Nice.
So, yeah, we figure if we're gonna do this, we might as well go all in. From a place called, I'll give them a plug, Lucadia Pizzeria in San Diego.
I'll give that a shot.
So Ryan, we're gonna throw it to Galen to give us an update on the name, image, and likeness. Feel free to jump in and ask a question, interrupt him, or whatever you want to do with that. If he takes, we have just about 7 minutes left. If he takes the whole time, then we'll just end it. And there's a couple questions on, and if it ends early, we'll throw a quick question out about, I think, which person has the best chance to make it in the pros, Tywan Mullen or Penix or TJD or Christian Lander.
Galen, when you do come out here, I'll take you for real pizza, though. For legit.
Good.
There's an Italian place that's.
Please.
Yeah.
We got to get back out there again. My brother-in-law still lives there, so it's.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's right. You told me that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you guys are certainly welcome.
Thank you.
Anytime.
I'm trying to talk Mrs. T into next summer.
To take you to Petco, Coach. You're gonna love it.
Yep.
Petco's fun.
Yep.
Get your brown jersey.
It's a good time.
Oh man, I need.
It is, man. It's the world's greatest outdoor food court, man. There is just so much good food and beer and. All right.
All right, you guys ready to roll on this?
Rock and roll.
Let's do it.
All right, here we go.
This is Jordan Halls, and I never missed a shot or an episode of the Assembly Call.
Thanks, Jordan. Welcome back to the Assembly Call. I'm the coach, Brian Tonsoni, here with Ryan Phillips and special guest Galen Clavio, esteemed member of Indiana's Name, Image, and Likeness Task Force. Remember, you need to be subscribed to our email newsletter. We send out a weekly IU news roundup even during the offseason, and after every game, we send out a detailed post-game analysis. Just text IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com. That's IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com. It's time now for our mailbag, and all questions are submitted via Twitter or our IU basketball community, which can be found at assemblycall.com/community. But since we have Galen with us this evening, we thought that he could give us an update on Indiana's Name, Image, and Likeness Task Force and what they have kind of come up with at this point. So, Galen, we'll just turn it over to you. Is how are things going on that task force?
They're good. Thank you for asking. We are a couple of meetings deep now, and look, it's a really interesting field because name, image, and likeness is still something that hasn't been settled by the NCAA. It hasn't been settled by state governments or the federal government. You've seen some states pass laws already that allow for capitalization by college athletes on name, image, and likeness, and you've got a bunch of things that potentially could go through Congress or go in front of Congress at least. What we're trying to do with this committee is really try to figure out what the route is moving forward that can help athletes in college, really figure out how to utilize social media to leverage their own brands, as they matriculate and go out into the professions that they're going into, whether that's athletics or outside of it. And so a lot of it is trying to make sure that the university doesn't run afoul of whatever the rules are at this point, but a lot of it is trying to think proactively. And, the partnership that IU's got with this company, Open Doors, is there to help our athletes here at IU understand their social media profiles and understand what their reach can be and how to set things up. And also to investigate, the opportunities down the line if athletes are indeed allowed to capitalize commercially on their name, image, and likeness. Help them understand what the full capacity of that could be. So we're still in the early stages of things, and it's going to be a long haul. But we've got some really smart people, both inside and outside the athletic department, on the committee, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
Good. What's the biggest misconception that we on the outside looking in at the amateur athletics, a traditional idea? What's the biggest misconception that the public has?
Well, I think within the confines of this, it's not so much a misconception as much as it is so much of what the NCAA has tried to put forward over the course of the last, well, especially the last 50 years, but within the last 20-year time frame, is that athletes don't have rights to their own publicity, essentially, and that all has to be ceded to athletic departments. And I think what's happened is that social media has finally cracked that facade, and I think we're realizing now that it's no longer the mass media era where you've just got this small number of media messages and everybody's having to go through the same TV stations or newspapers. You've got brand value, and you've got people online whose Instagram feeds have a value that's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe potentially down the road. So that's the biggest thing, is that I think that the NCAA is having to change on this because of the power of the marketplace. And that to me is pretty exciting, because it's one of the few good things I think that's come out of social media over the course of the last 10 years.
Yeah, it's almost, the free market at work, basically, as these guys establishing themselves. I think that's been a heartening thing over the last, 10 months, really, has been seeing athletes seize the power that they have. And it's not for the first time, but it feels like in the most expressive way so far, to demand better treatment, better, health protections, things like that, and realizing the power they have over the marketplace. And I think that that's been really heartening to see them banding together, not individuals, but banding together as a group and saying, hey, we want to be treated better. And I think that this, the NIL stuff is really important in that way. Have you guys thought of do you have a projected timeline for when you think this may happen? I mean, obviously loose timeline for the future.
I mean, no, because so much is up in the air politically right now, because even within the Senate and the House of Representatives, you've got, Democrats want to go one way on it and Republicans want to go another way on it. And even within the Republicans, there's not a consistent message about what direction, whether it's a states' rights issue, where it's like, oh yeah, well, Florida passed a very loose interpretation of name, image, and likeness because they looked at it as a potential recruiting benefit that they could utilize, whereas another state might pass a far more constrictive bill. So I think that's where it's hard to project moving forward. But what I'm hoping that we see as we move forward with this, and I think what's been talked about with the committee a bit, is, all right, how do we, with what exists right now, at least empower students who are athletes to learn how to utilize social media more effectively? And that's something we do with all students. It's not something that's just limited to athletes. I teach a class on social media utilization, and that's the whole point of the class, whether you're an athlete or not.
Well, Galen, we appreciate that someone like you is on the task force, and we wish the task force nothing best, because I think it's a real plus for Indiana to be on the forefront of this and be planning ahead rather than waiting for it to happen. And I think it's a selling point for our athletic programs, for their athletes. So we thank you for your work. And that's going to do it here for us tonight at the Assembly Call.
That's it. We're done. No more questions.
So that'll end this show. If you want to see us do the live show, join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording. And don't forget to go to assemblycall.com or text IU to 66866 to join our free email newsletter. Special thanks to Bob Thompson for producing most of the music you hear on the show, and thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again next Thursday night.
Take it from me, Yogi Ferrell. Keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim. And go Hoosiers.
Thank everybody for coming out.
All right, I get it out here, folks. Thank you.
All right, we had a couple questions that we didn't get to. If I could ask you guys real quick before we let you go for the evening. The Outsider on Twitter said, we are at a pivotal time for IU basketball with 2 of 4 new staff members, an all Archie roster, a new offense, and a shift in tone for this proving year. Recognizing these factors above are all connected, which one poises IU's success best for the next 2 to 3 years? Is it the additions to the coaching staff? Is it the roster of all Archie players? Is it the new scheme offensively, or this shift in tone that the Outsider says? Galen, any thoughts on which one sets up IU better for success in the near future?
Oh gosh, I think the combination of the roster and the coaches.
There you go.
Because ultimately they're very much intermixed. And look, I think everybody's hungry for success with IU basketball, and understandably so. And people still don't grasp how much infrastructure had to be rebuilt from the ground up when Archie Miller got here. And the idea, like, unfortunately, the initial hires that he made, while fine, I think in multiple cases now he's made better hires on the coaching side than the people that they replaced. And that's not to take anything away from the people that were there before, but I think he's upgraded. And I also think from a player perspective, it's been a pretty steady form of upgrade as well. I mean, Romeo Langford was a great player, obviously, and that was kind of a unicorn situation, but the consistency of roster and the idea that you don't have to rely on freshmen constantly to come in and fill key roles, which was such an integral, for better or for worse, part of the Tom Crean era, that they're moving away from that now. And so that's where I think, those two things will help to build on each other, and you'll get to a point ideally where you're just doing like Michigan State does. And you got a great group of players that have been there for a couple of years and a couple of guys who can play right away. And then when those guys move, you got this other great group of players that can be there for a couple of years. And it's program based. It's Villanova. It's those sorts of programs that just have this reservoir of talent. So that's
I think the greatest part of the three freshmen, not including Lander, who I think is sort of in a different category. I know he's a freshman with those guys, but he's a little different category. The best part about the three freshmen, Leo, Galloway, and Geronimo, is that they get to come in and be freshmen. They get to provide some energy off the bench and learn, instead of being thrust into the starting lineup and having to perform, at a significant level, even being key bench players. I mean, those guys may not play very much, but the fact that they get to come in and, okay, Jerome Hunter has 4 fouls with, 15 minutes left. Jordan, get out there and see what you can do, and just be athletic and get in the way and muck things up and maybe have a backdoor cut for a layup. They get to just take advantage of minutes and sit on the bench. And there's no better learning tool. You watch as much film as you want. There is no better learning tool than sitting on the bench and watching your team play and realizing, oh, he did that wrong. When I get in, let me cut this way. And, when I play defense, go under that screen instead of over because he's getting beat with it. There is no better tool. I got injured in high school and had to sit on the bench for 4 games. When I came back, I was way better than I was before. And it was just having to watch and understand and absorb everything that was going on and realize, you see the game from a different angle than when you're on the floor. And I think that really helps the jump from freshman to sophomore. Isn't just playing time. It isn't just going out and getting it done. It's also watching and learning the game on a different level than you did in high school. And I think that's going to help those guys long-term and in the short term for IU as well. And that's a huge development.
For me, it's the all Archie roster. As a coach myself, when you take over a program, you're dealing with, I don't want to say baggage, because not every time you take over a program it's baggage, but your way of doing things is different than the previous guy. And if if we take over seniors and someone's been on the varsity at the high school level for 3 years and then you come in as a new coach, it's going to be hard to get that buy-in. And it takes 2 or 3 years to get the buy-in at my level. Well, you got to get that roster to be your guys. So for me, the answer to this question is, you need the basketball players. You can have great coaches, but if you don't have great basketball players and don't recruit the right kids, you're not winning. I don't care how great the coach is, and that comes from a coach. We're good. We're important for 2 or a year. Squeeze 2 or 3 wins, maybe 4 wins a year by your coaching if you're good. If you're a bad coach, you could lose 2 or 3 or 4 by your decisions, or in case of Fran McCaffrey, you can lose 50. But anyway, we'll not go on a bash Fran too much tonight. But so me, it's those guys. And what Ryan said about freshmen was nice, is they can each impact the game in their own way while learning the other things that they need to do. Leo can come in a game and maybe hit 2 or 3 threes and win a game that we needed some shots. Geronimo can come in, provide defense or slashing if needed in a particular game, and that toughness factor of Trey Galloway. So I think that, and then the ability to be more competitive in practice and be team-oriented to push players. I think these freshmen are really good, and they've played together and can really elevate practice. So thanks, the outsider, for that question. And then Jared had this in the community. We'll end tonight with this. Which current basketball/football player do you think has the best professional potential and why. And the choices were Trace Jackson Davis, Christian Lander, both in basketball, and from the football program, Michael Penix, Tywan Mullen, and Whop Fillier. Whoever
I hope
wants
it's
that
Wop
one first.
just because of his name, but
go ahead, Ryan. Who do you think's got the best professional potential?
I think it's Christian Lander. He's very young. He's a 5-star guy, and the NBA is a point guard driven league. I think that he gets there and can impact games. And of course, we're all projecting development too, obviously in this. That's why it's tough. But I think it's Lander. I think that if this were 1980, I'd say Trace Jackson Davis because it's a post dominated game and he's not a great shooter yet. And he just his ability to score in the post and defend in the post are going to be fantastic at the next level. But I think that Christian Lander in a guard driven world is the guy who I would pick as having the highest ceiling as a professional.
Galen.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's like we're drafting off potential, and it feels like when you combine Lander's potential with I think where he's situated already, you can already see the signs. I mean, I love Tywan Mullen. It is really hard to make it as a starting defensive back in the NFL, which is essentially what we're talking about here. Same thing with Michael Penix. There's such a huge mountain that you have to climb in order to get to that spot. And it's not that it's necessarily easier in basketball, but it feels like Lander is a lot closer to that mark than because there's such a sea of football players that you have to leap over in order to get to that point. And Trace Jackson Davis, where he's at right now, no. And that's just because he doesn't have an outside shot. That's not to say that he can't develop one in the pros. I mean, we're seeing players that you would have never thought would have been able to hit outside shots, like becoming 37, 38, 39% three-point shooters in the NBA, which just seems baffling. But it's hard to project that based upon where he's at now. He's a very gifted offensive player, but we need to see what happens in like 3 or 4 years.
I have to go with you too. Basketball is a game-oriented or guard-oriented game right now, and I think Christian's game and pace and ball screen ability, if it's what everyone says it is and can play at this level and then maybe the next level, I think he has the biggest chance of making it professionally. But, boy, Tywan Mullen to me is just a fun watch. I do think
he is.
Galen, you answered my next question. Is it how – what's the difference between making it professionally in basketball and professionally in football? I think you have a much easier chance in basketball if your skill level's at that level and a longer longevity too, because as we've seen in the NFL already, we have outstanding players that are unfortunately going to be out for a season or a few weeks in football, and it's harder. The careers are a lot shorter.
Yeah.
In football. So, but boy, Tywan Mullen and Whop Fillier and Michael, those three, I'm really excited for IU football because we have some athletes that can really do some things.
It's interesting because that's essentially the Michael Penix argument against is that he hasn't been able to stay healthy long enough to really demonstrate the combination of skill, which I think he's got the potential skill there, no question, and being on the field long enough. And with Whop, I love Whop. It's hard for a guy, his size to be a super duper star in the NFL. Yep. Not to say that he can't have a long and very, very successful career, but if we're talking about the highest ceiling, I still think it's Lander for all the reasons that we talked about.
Yeah, especially if he improves his shot. I mean, he can shoot it from the outside, but I think that Coach and I have talked about his form sometimes. He's a lefty, and he has his left foot way ahead of his right foot when he jumps a lot of times for his jump shot. He evens that out, gets his balance right. I think his jump shot's going to take off because the release is really good on it. It's a little far away from his body, but the general mechanics of how it comes off his hand and the backspin he gets is fantastic. And that's as Coach will tell you, and we've talked about this a lot. That's the basis of a shot. And if you can do that, it's great. The other stuff is just changing mechanics and shifting a little bit, getting your weight under you, all that. He does that. Guy's going to be a knockdown shooter, I think.
He's just got that mentality where he likes to score, and he's going to do whatever he needs to do physically to score. As long as he can adapt to the college game and have the maturity to play the game the right way. But, if he needs a little push shot from three, he's got a little set shot, push shot. It's low. If he drives the elbow, he can elevate over people. He can twist, and those are special skills, and we can't coach that. I mean, that's the thing that excites me about Lander is you can't coach some of that stuff. You just marvel at it and then find ways to use it. But you also have to tame some of those natural instincts to play wildly. He's got to play well. Talent is one thing, but you got to produce. So, I'm going to hold out until he actually produces. But to answer Jared's question, that'll do it, fellas. I thank you for your time this evening. Really great discussion tonight. Thank you to everyone in the chat mob. We appreciate you guys.
Thank you, Galen, for coming on as well. We love.
We should be seeing schedules soon, right? So.
Well, I mean, we were thinking we weren't going to have a football season, and then we had a schedule like 4 days later.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think certainly I feel like by the end of the month we're going to have a basketball schedule to look at. So it's exciting.
All right, everyone, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
Take it easy,
All
guys.
right.
Thanks
Later,
so much.
guys.
All right.
Of course, always.